125 Difficulties in Obedience. Presence of God. O Jesus, teach me the secret of humble obedience which submits to every superior and every command. Meditation. 1. Although obedience is precious, because it places our whole life in God's will, nevertheless, in practice it has its difficulties, and these arise chiefly because the command itself does not come directly from God, but through His representatives. Thus it often happens that we fail to see God in our superiors, and to recognize His authority in them. For example, when, as often happens in religious life, we have as our superior a former colleague, or perhaps even a former pupil, younger and less experienced than we, one whose weaknesses and defects we know only too well, we could easily be tempted to have insufficient respect for his authority and his commands. Then a life of obedience becomes especially difficult. It is hard for us to obey. We do not have recourse to the superior with childlike trust, and what is worse, we justify this attitude to ourselves. Here we are making a great mistake in perspective. We forget that, no matter who the superior is, he is invested with authority which comes from God. Authority placed on him solely because he has been called to this office. This authority is unchangeable and has the same force, whether the superior is old or young, experienced and virtuous or inexperienced and less virtuous. Basically, if we find ourselves in these difficulties, we must lay the blame on our lack of a supernatural spirit, a spirit of faith. We are judging spiritual matters according to natural standards, and from the point of view of human values, which makes it impossible for us to live a life of real obedience, a life entirely based on supernatural values and motives. We must learn how to rise above human views concerning the person of our superior, his good qualities, or his faults, his actions in the past, and so forth, to look upon him only as the representative of God and of his divine authority. It is true, we often find it absolutely necessary to use all our strength and efforts to do this if we do not wish to lose the fruit of a life of obedience. It is certain that the more we force ourselves to see in our superiors the authority which comes from God, so much the more perfect and meritorious our obedience will be, and God Himself will guide us through them. 2. Very often, if not always, a want of supernatural spirit is accompanied by a want of humility. It is painful to self-love to depend upon and submit to others. It is hard to subject our own affairs to the judgment and rule of someone else, and to acquiesce to his decisions. It is particularly difficult if the superior seems to be, at least in some respects, our inferior in age, culture, experience, or ability. Then the ego, its pride hurt, rebels vigorously, hiding its resistance under 1,000 excuses. This, too, is a grave error because, although it is true that the superior may be our inferior, in some ways, we must not consider this, but only the fact that he is always superior in relation to us because God has made him so. He is superior because God has placed him over us. He is superior because God has given him the mission to direct us in his place. His personal qualities or defects do not affect the office of superior which God has conferred upon him. Certainly a superior, on his part, should endeavor to acquire, if he does not already possess them, the virtue and capability required by his office. But this is his affair. Our duty, as subjects, is to do but one thing: to submit with filial humility, to allow ourselves to be guided and governed. It is strictly a question of humility, because after all, humility means humbling ourselves, putting ourselves in the right place, the place of a subject in relation to a superior, which is always that of humble dependence. Let us reflect on the obedience of Jesus, and in it we shall see the attitude of humility carried to its utmost. Although he was God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. Being made in the likeness of men, he humbled himself, becoming obedient unto death, even to the death of the cross. Phil 2, 7.8. What is our self-abasement, our submission to our superiors, and our dependence on them compared to this profound humiliation of Jesus, who, although he was God, willed to become man, to live as man, subjecting himself to his own creatures? Let us be convinced that if our obedience is faulty, it is almost always because we are wanting in humility. My sweet Savior, can I see you obedient to your creatures for love of me, and refuse to be obedient out of love for you, to those who represent you? Can I see you obedient unto death, the death of the cross, out of love for me, without lovingly embracing this virtue, and the cross, on which you consummated it? I will force myself to the utmost of my power to imitate your example, and for love of you, obey all creatures, my superiors, equals, or inferiors, in all things, without argument, murmuring, or delay, but joyfully and lovingly. Therefore, I will not question the reasons why I am told to do this or that. I will not think about the way in which the order is given to me, or the person who gives it. I will consider your will alone, letting myself be moved like you, in any direction, by anyone, in agreeable or disagreeable, suitable or unseemly circumstances. It matters not. Grant me the obedience you desire. O Jesus, who willed to make reparation for Adam's disobedience and mine, at the cost of your life, O Jesus, who by your death acquired for me the grace of knowing how to obey, I wish to live longer only to sacrifice my life by perfect, continual obedience. St. Francis de Sales. O Lord, you desired to infuse obedience into our hearts, but you cannot, because we will not recognize that you speak and work through our superiors, and also because we are attached to our own will. Saint Mary Magdalene Dei Pazzi.